Well, alright, in this video we're going to take a look at page 4 of the real estate purchase contract. So you'll notice where we're starting here is section 8.4 is additional earnest money. On the additional earnest money, you're probably not going to use that very often, so most of the time you're probably going to end up checking the box here for will not, that there will not be additional earnest money. But just want to explain real quick how that works and when you might use it. So a situation that you may want to use it is if you were in a multiple offer situation and wanted to have your offer look a little stronger, you might want to look at doing something like that, saying there will be additional earnest money. Now in the event that you end up checking the will box here, then something to point out is that no later than the due diligence deadline referenced in 24B or the financing and appraisal deadline in 24C, so whichever one is later, that the buyer will deliver the earnest money, additional earnest money, to the buyer's brokerage. So however much that ended up being, if you checked the will box, you'd want to make sure we get that by 5 p.m. on either the due diligence or financing and appraisal deadline, whichever is later. So again, most of the time you're probably going to end up doing will not, but in the event you did do will, make sure you collect that earnest money, and then we have 3 days to get it deposited. So, but again, you're typically probably going to do will not most of the time on that. Next is addenda. So there either are or are not. So if you are going to be using either a blank addendum, which would be this one right here, doing an FHA VA addendum, because if the loan is an FHA or a VA loan, you're going to need that addendum. If the property is built prior to 1978, you'll need the lead-based paint disclosure and acknowledgement here. And then other would be if you were going to be doing some other type of an addendum, you know, maybe a short sale or something like that. You would check this box, type in here short sale addendum. So if you are not attaching any other addendums, check the are not box. Now, one thing I want to point out here is if your client is getting an FHA or VA loan, you'll use this addendum, which is where it would cover if you're asking for the seller to pay closing costs for your buyer. In the event they're not doing an FHA or VA loan, say that it is a conventional loan, but they are still wanting to ask the seller to pay their closing costs, you would want to check the box here for addendum, type in number 1 here, and then on that addendum number 1, type in asking for the closing costs. So we'll cover that in a different video, but that would be this section. So if you are not attaching any of these addendums or any other ones, just check the are not box. If you are, check the box that there are, and then either add an addendum number 1 here, add that it's an FHA VA, lead-based paint disclosure, or other. Next is the home warranty plan. So the home warranty plan, you have the option here of saying that a home warranty will not be included in the transaction. Again, most of the time people are checking the will box that there will be a home warranty. I would say you're probably going to want to say for it to be ordered by the buyer, a company selected by the buyer, and then paid for, whatever dollar amount here, and paid for by the seller is the boxes that I typically would do on this. Now, again, your buyer can end up paying for it themselves. I just like the idea of the buyer being able to select the plan, because if the seller's choosing the plan and you don't know what type of plan or who it is, so typically I would do buyer, and then seller, and then in this line put somewhere around 500, maybe even a little over 500, 510 or something, depending on which home warranty plan you're going to get. Down here is the condition of the property. So the property is being purchased in as-is condition. So if you'll remember back to section 8.1, the buyer can still do due diligence and check all those things, but they are purchasing the property as is. And the condition of the property, the seller is acknowledging and agreeing that it'll be in the same general condition basically as when the buyer saw the property. They're also agreeing not to go and do anything else, or excuse me, that they will disclose to the buyer any of the defects on the property, and that the buyer should review all those. This section here is saying prior to settlement, the buyer can do a final walkthrough no earlier than 7 calendar days prior to settlement, and with reasonable notice that they can go do a walkthrough. Now the purpose of this walkthrough is not another inspection. The purpose of it is just to go and take a look at the property again to make sure that it is in the same general condition, that if you had asked for any repairs or things to be made on the property, that those have been taken care of. And then 11.2 says if you go get there and some of these items are not done, that with the lender's approval, you could escrow money to complete those repairs for 30 days. So a 30-day deadline. Changes during the transaction. This is where the seller is agreeing from the date of acceptance till closing that they're not going to have any changes. They're not going to go rent it to somebody new. They're not going to enter any new leases. They're not going to make substantial changes to the property. They're not going to go get new loans on it. They're not going to change title. Authority of the signers says both the buyer and the seller have the right to sign on behalf of themselves, basically, but if they were a company or something. And then 14 says this is the complete contract. So everything that we have agreed to is agreed here in writing. So you can't have any special agreements outside of this contract. And then section 15 here talks about mediation. This is, we're either going to check the shall box or the may. Now ultimately it's up to your client what they want to do. Your job is just to explain the difference. Shall means that any dispute that comes from this purchase contract, we will go to mediation first. We shall. May just means, hey, we have a choice. We can decide. If our dispute's over something small, we can just work it out on our own. If you had checked shall and there was some dispute over $100 and this is saying you'd have to go to mediation, which would cost way more than the $100. So it's just really the seller's and the buyer's option of what they agree to on this in terms of shall or may. You should just explain to them. Shall just means you have to. May just means you have the option, and then they get to decide. That's it for this video.